Hey, Dan Beagleman here. This video is on pentatonic and blues scales. There are two types of pentatonic scales, major and minor, and two types of blues scales, major and minor. And the blues scales are like offshoots of the pentatonic scales. They're pentatonic scales with an additional note which acts as a passing tone, and I'll get into that more later in this video. The pentatonic and blues scales are your go-to user-friendly scales. You can use these two scales to play great guitar lines, solos, create lines, color songs up, compose music, if you will, create like signature guitar riffs in any genre of music, rock, jazz, blues, country, fusion, whatever. Obviously there are many other types of scales as well, but the other types of scales like modes and synthetic scales and stuff that gets a little bit out there, as cool as they are somewhat more limited in specific genres of music, where the pentatonic and the blues scales are pretty much globally user-friendly for any types of music at all. You can't get hurt using a pentatonic or blues scales in any musical situation. You just have to make sure you're using the correct one, either major or minor, and that would be determined obviously by your key and or the chord cycle that you might be playing over. In this video, I'll cover patterns for playing the pentatonic and blues scales vertically. That means staying in one area of the fingerboard and crossing the strings vertically. And I'll also show you patterns for playing the pentatonic and blues scales horizontally, where you're crossing the fingerboard and not staying in one position, but actually covering a wider range, and then showing you how you can use these horizontal patterns to act as bridges to connect these different vertical patterns. So there's a lot to be seen here, and just again with these two scales and learning how to play them across the fingerboard, you'll be able to play great stuff in all different types of musical genres. I'll also cover connecting the pentatonic scales to the correct mode to use. In other words, if you're not familiar with the modes, check out my video on the modes on the diatonic scale: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian, because a lot of times you can mix the pentatonic and blues scales with the modes, and that will give you just more options, more tools in your musical toolbox, if you will, to just be more creative with your playing. So, on to the pentatonic and blues scales. As I mentioned, there are two types of pentatonic scales and two types of blues scales, both major and minor. The major pentatonic scale is derived from the major scale, and the minor pentatonic scale is derived from the natural minor scale. Here's a C major scale in the 5th position. You know, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You can hear that. Okay, 7-tone scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then octave and starts the scale again. Okay, if I take out the 4th and the 7th degree of that major scale, in other words, 1, 2, 3, if I don't play the 4th note, 5, 6, don't play the 7th tone, I have a major pentatonic scale. Still sounds like a major sounding scale, right? But it's a 5-tone scale now, not a 7-tone scale. So the major pentatonic scale is a major scale leaving out the 4th and 7th degrees. Same holds true for the minor pentatonic scale, because the minor pentatonic scale is derived from the minor scale. Here's an A natural minor scale, all natural notes. Okay, now if I play an A minor pentatonic scale, I'm going to be leaving out those same two notes that I left out, but related to the minor pentatonic scale, it's going to be leaving out the 2nd and the 6th degrees. So 1, not 2, 3, 4, 5, not 6, leaving that out. So in both cases, in the major pentatonic and for the C major pentatonic and the A minor pentatonic, I left out the B note and I left out the F note. Okay, out from the major scale gives me a major pentatonic. Leaving them out for the minor scale gives me a minor pentatonic in the key of C or A minor. The term relative major minor, if you've ever heard that term before, if not, I'll explain real quick. Relative major minor means that the same key can share, and the same scales can share the same notes. In other words, C major scale, or the key of C, has all natural notes. No sharps, no flats. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And the key of A minor, or an A minor scale, shares the same notes. No sharps, no flats. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Okay? So it's like two sides of the same coin. C major on one side, A minor on the other side. And of course that goes with, any keys at all. G major, E minor, the same. D flat major, B flat minor, same. They contain the same notes. The difference is which is the key center, which note are you kind of hanging your hat on, as the other notes will kind of revolve around that. In other words, here's a C major pentatonic scale. Sounds like a C major chord. Now if I play the same notes but starting in on A, now it sounds minor. So C major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic, same scale. The blues scales, as I said, are variations, or they're derived from the pentatonic scales. If I play that C major pentatonic scale, which again is a 5-tone scale using the first, second, third, fifth, and sixth degrees of the major scale, if I add a note between the second and third degree, in this case would be E flat, I'm going to add in that E flat, which will connect as a passing tone the second and third degree. I will have a C major blues scale. Still sounds like the C chord, it works with that, but it's that additional note, which in this case is a flat third. It, nicely bridges, or, leads you into the major third. Right? So a C major blues scale is now a 6-tone scale because it's a 5-tone pentatonic with the additional flat third, which again bridges the second and third degrees together. Now flipping the coin over, using that same E flat note applied to the minor pentatonic scale, now it's going to act as it's the flat fifth, which acts as a connection between the fourth and the fifth degree of the minor scale. And that's probably the scale that we've all learned early on when we started playing guitar. It's probably the first scale that we ever learned, the minor pentatonic. For playing your basic blues type rock solos. And okay, so C major pentatonic and A minor pentatonic share the same notes. C major blues scale, A minor blues scale share the same notes. It's again that term relative major minor, two sides of the same coin. And as I mentioned, not only can you use these scales for soloing, improvising, coloring songs, playing little fills and stuff, you can compose with these basic scales. I'm sure probably everybody on the planet has heard this. My Girl by the Temptations. It's just a C major pentatonic scale. Then just playing it over C chord and over an F chord. So you can see how quickly the pentatonic scale, a major pentatonic scale, can be put to use. Right, everybody on the planet's heard that as well. Sunshine of Your Love. It's a riff just based on a D minor blues scale. So many signature guitar riffs, things that just we've heard a million times, and kind of just it's in our DNA. We've heard it so many times, just built on the basic pentatonic and or blues scales. They are your go-to scales for all different applications in all genres of music. So on to some patterns for playing these two types of scales. The pentatonic scales, both major and minor, are 5-tone scales. So because they have 5 tones in them, I can build 5 vertical patterns from each note of the scale. I'll show you what I mean. Here's an A major pentatonic scale. A, B, C sharp, E, F sharp. Okay? A major pentatonic scale is a major scale without the 4th and the 7th degrees. So again, major pentatonic scale for A. Okay, so I'm going to play pattern 1, which is going to be an A major pentatonic scale starting and ending on the A root note. And matches the chord nicely. The second tone in the A major pentatonic scale is B. So I'm going to start on a B note, and I'll play the entire range of notes in the A major pentatonic scale starting on the B note. So that will give me a low B to a high D. That's the range that I'll get, using pattern number 2. Okay? Okay, that's the notes, that's the pattern, but it sounds kind of incomplete because we're not getting a sense of the key center or the root note of the scale. So I'm going to play the same notes that I just played, but I'm going to start and end on the root note A. In this case, there's my root note A there. So I'll start on the root note, I'm going to go to the highest note, to the lowest note, and return to the A key center. Now, it sounds more complete. It's like dotting the end of a sentence, because your ears now can focus on the key center of the scale, which is an important concept. You want to always know what the key center is and sort of relate that as you're playing. When when you're using it for solos or lines, fills, whatever, you want to always ensure that that key center is really made available. Okay, pattern number 3, starting and ending on a C sharp note. Again, kind of incomplete, at least from my ears. Same idea, same notes, but starting and ending on A. Okay, pattern number 4, the 4th tone is E. So A major pentatonic starting on E. Incomplete, starting and ending on the root note A. And now the 5th and final pattern starting on F sharp. And now if I start and end on the root note A, okay, so 5 patterns for the A major pentatonic scale, or any pentatonic scale, okay, just identified by the root note. And you can clearly hear the difference when the root note is really focused or highlighted, as opposed to starting and ending on the successive tones. So when you're practicing these scale patterns, I would recommend start and end on the lowest root note, just to get the scales in your hands. In other words, what fingers per string, but also practice them starting on the root notes as I just showed you, so your ears can really, again, focus in on the key center. Another thing about the pentatonic scales, both major, which I just showed you, and minor, which I will show you in a moment, they all have just 2 notes or 2 fingers per string. So sometimes it's an easy way to see how they lay out. And it's mostly your 1st, 3rd, and 4th finger. Occasionally you'll be using your 2nd finger. Okay, that being said, I'll now demonstrate the same idea for the minor pentatonic scales. I'll use A minor as an example. Here's an A minor pentatonic scale. 5 tones, A, C, D, E, and G. Okay, a minor pentatonic scale is like a natural minor scale without the 2nd and 6th degrees. So again, same idea, starting and ending on the root note for pattern 1, A minor pentatonic scale starting on A. And of course, you probably recognize that pattern. It's probably the first pattern we've all learned when we started playing guitar, and we learned that first scale, and now we could play lead You know, we can play solos and go, wow, that's the coolest thing that, I've ever seen. Okay, the second tone in the A minor pentatonic scale is C. So here's A minor pentatonic starting on C. And it actually now sounds like a major pentatonic scale because it is. They contain the same notes, the concept of relative major minor. But anyway, it doesn't sound minor. But now I'll start and end on the A note. Now it does. Okay. Third tone in the A minor pentatonic scale is D. So same idea, starting and ending on D. And now starting and ending on A. Fourth tone in the A minor pentatonic scale is E, starting and ending on E. And now if I start and end on A, and the fifth and final note in the A minor pentatonic scale is G, so starting on a G note. And now if I start and end on the A root note, sounds a lot better, and your ears are hearing or focusing on the key center. Okay, so 5 patterns for the major pentatonic scale, 5 patterns for the minor pentatonic scale. And as I said before, recommend that you practice these patterns just to get them in your hands from the lowest note and to the highest and back to the lowest, and then play the same patterns but starting and ending on the root notes, so more importantly your ears can really focus on the key center of the scale. Now, as I just showed you 5 patterns for the major and minor pentatonic scales, I'll show you 5 patterns for the major and minor blues scales. I'll take those major and minor pentatonic scale patterns and transform them into major and minor blues scales. The major blues scale and the minor blues scale are like variations or offshoots of the pentatonic scales. They add one extra note which acts as a passing tone. Here is an A major pentatonic scale, a 5-tone scale. Now if I add a note between the 2nd and 3rd degree of the scale, 1, 2, 3, the note in between is a C natural. I now have an A major blues scale, which is a 6-tone scale. And that note that I added, it's a minor 3rd to the key, acts as a passing tone, as I said, between the 2nd and the 3rd degrees. Now, since this is a major pattern, it's a major pentatonic scale, and the 3rd of A is C sharp, this C note is a minor 3rd. So if you kind of sat on that note, it would kind of clash in a sense, as it would sort of be screaming, hey, I'm a minor chord, I'm not a major chord. So you don't want to kind of sit on that, but use it again, as I said, as a passing tone. Right? And then, so it works too nicely, as I said, just glide you from the 2nd and 3rd tone. Okay, so here are now 5 patterns for the major blues scale, starting and ending on each successive note of the A major pentatonic scale. Pattern 1, A major blues scale. A major blues scale starting and ending on A. Here's an A major blues scale starting on the 2nd tone, B. Again, as I showed you with the pentatonic scales, by not starting and ending on the root note, it sounds a little dull or unfinished. So I'm going to play the same thing I just played, A major blues scale, where the lowest note is going to be B, the 2nd tone, but I'm going to start and end on the root note A. Now, sounds like it matches the chord better. Same concept, starting on the 3rd tone of the A major pentatonic scale, which is C sharp. I'll turn this into a blues scale, starting on C sharp. Again, not really completed. Same idea, starting on the A root note now. And sounds better, okay? The fourth tone in the A major pentatonic scale is E. So starting on E, I'll play an A major blues scale now. And if I start and end down on the root note A, sounds, again, belongs to the A major chord. And the final pattern is starting on F sharp, and now starting on the A root note. Sounds more complete, again, because your ear really can center now on the A root note of the scale. So there are 5 patterns for the A major blues scale, and I'll do the same for the A minor blues scale. An A minor blues scale is an A minor pentatonic scale with an additional note added as a passing tone. A minor pentatonic scale has 5 notes, A, C, D, E, G, and the added note in this case is going to be an E flat note, which is going to be a passing tone between the D and the E, which is the 4th and 5th degree of the minor scale, actually. So here's A minor pentatonic again, and now A minor blues. It adds that, a flat 5, it's a tritone. So A minor blues scale, starting and ending on the root note A. Okay, A minor blues scale, starting on the second tone, C. But now if I start and end on the key note A, it's going to sound like this. And matches the chord nicely. Third tone in the A minor pentatonic scale is D, so here's an A minor blues scale starting on D. And now here's the A minor pentatonic scale starting on A in that pattern. The fourth tone in the A minor pentatonic scale is E. So if I turn this into a blues scale, it's going to sound like this. And if I start and end on A, it will sound like this. And the final note in the A minor pentatonic scale is G, so playing an A minor blues scale, starting and ending on G. And same idea if I now start and end on the root note A. Okay, so you can clearly hear the difference when you start and end on the root note as opposed to starting and ending on just the lowest note, in the pattern. So as I said with the pentatonic scales, the same applies to the blues scales. I would recommend playing these patterns from the lowest note to the highest and back to the lowest to ensure that you have the right fingering in your hands, and then practice the scales starting and ending on the root note, and that way your ears will more zero in on the key center of the scale, and it will sound like it's more completed as using it when you're phrasing with the particular pattern. Okay, now I'll show you some patterns for playing major and minor pentatonic scales and major and minor blues scales horizontally. All these patterns I showed you so far are vertical patterns where you're staying in one area of the fingerboard and crossing the strings vertically. The horizontal scales that I'll show you are patterns where you're actually crossing the board horizontally, and the cool thing about those are, one, they sound good in and of themselves, but two, they can act as bridges between two different vertical patterns. In other words, if you're, let's say, playing A minor pentatonic in position 5, that first pattern, okay, and then the next pattern is position 7, instead of just jumping your hand over, you can shift using these pentatonic scales, horizontal scales. You can use them as, like, shifting or bridges to shift your hand up into the next or successive pattern or 2 patterns higher, and then you can dance around the fingerboard. In other words, you can play in a vertical fashion, play horizontally to get to another one of the vertical patterns, then stay vertically, and then return using the horizontal patterns. So it really will kind of connect the entire fingerboard. I showed you 5 patterns for pentatonic scales, both major and minor, and 5 patterns for blues scales, both major and minor, played vertically. Again, in other words, you're staying in a particular area of the fingerboard and you're vertically crossing the strings. But there are also horizontal patterns for these scales as well, and these are very, very cool sounding, and there's interesting symmetry in the fingering patterns for them. Here's a C major pentatonic scale. In 1 octave, I have five notes. Remember, pentatonic scale, 5 tones. C, D, E, G, A. Octave. Okay, those same 5 notes. If I start on a C note on my 6th string, instead of playing it vertically, I'm going to play it in a horizontal fashion. I'm going to play C, D, and then shift up or slide up 2 frets for the 3rd note, E. And now, after I slid up, I'm going to drop down to string 5 and just play fingers 1 and 3. Those 5 notes are the same as what I just played down here. Right? Just played in a horizontal fashion. But now the cool thing about this, as I said, is the symmetry of this. It's a pattern. 1, 3, slide, and the slide is always going to be 2 frets. 1, 3, slide, 1, 3. So I played the pentatonic scale on strings 6 and 5. Now, after I made my slide and finished those, played those 5 notes, I'm going to stay there, and I'm going to go down to string 4, and I'm going to play the same pattern, same area, I haven't shifted left to right, and do the same idea. 1, 3, slide, 1, 3. And that's just 1 octave higher than what I just played. Okay? And now if I go down to string 2, I can play the same pattern on strings 2 and 1. The thing is, though, when you get to string 2, you have to move up 1 fret higher. I can't start here, I have to start here, because strings 3 and 2 are tuned in thirds, where the other strings are tuned in fourths. So I have to compensate by going up 1 fret. Excuse me. So here's the 3 octaves for a C major pentatonic scale. On strings 6 and 5, strings 4 and 3, and strings 2 and 1, I'm going to shift up 1 fret and then apply that same pattern, 1, 3, slide, 1, 3. All 3 together. And as you can hear, it's very, very fluid sounding, very, very, very different than playing vertically. Very, very nice, very, very fluid sounding, as I said. The C major pentatonic scale and the A minor pentatonic scale have the same notes. Remember, I talked about relative major minor, that, flip the coin over. So C major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic being the same. Just happen to start here on the A note, but stay within that same pattern I showed you. Now it sounds like a minor scale, minor pentatonic. C major pentatonic. A minor pentatonic. Right, so the same fingering pattern can apply. Just remember, if you want to use it for the major, this is your note that you want to focus on. This, this, this. If you want to play for the minor, you want to focus on that A note, the 5th note in the minor pentatonic scale, where instead of going 1, the C major pentatonic has 1, 3, slide, 1, 3, 1, 3, slide 1, 3, 1, 3, slide 1, 3. For the minor pentatonic, you can actually start on the A note with your first finger, and instead of going 1, 3, slide 1, 3, go 1, 4, slide 1, 4. So that's an alternative in that regard. 1, 3, slide 1, 3 for the major, 1, 4, slide 1, 4 for the minor. Okay, and you can, intermingle these two together. If you're in the C, the 1, 3 slide thing, that will work for the major or the minor, or the 1, 4 slide will work for the major and the minor. I personally like the 1, 3 slide one better. I'd feel a little awkward. Well, sliding with the fourth finger, but it can be done. Let me show you something else though that might help to ensure that you don't hit some bad notes. As I said, when you get to string 2, you have to compensate by shifting up 1 fret higher when you get to string 2, or else it won't be good. 1, 3, slide 1, 3, 1, 3, slide 1, 3. When you get to string 2, you have to shift up a fret. If I don't, it's going to be this. Right? It would be 2 octaves of C major pentatonic and then 1 octave of B major pentatonic. So I said you have to shift your first finger up higher for string 2, but there's an alternative fingering which might help to ensure you don't make a mistake like that. 1, 3, slide 1, 3, 1, 3, slide 1. Now for the last note of the second octave, instead of using your third finger on string 3, if you use your second finger for that note, opening up that space a little bit, this will pull your hand up 1 fret, ensuring that when you drop your first finger, you're going to be on the C note that you want. So again, this would be like this. 1, 3, slide 1, 3, 1, 3, slide 1, reach out your second finger 1 fret 2, and then set up again 1, 3, slide 1, 3. So. Right? So there's an alternative fingering, again, ensuring that you won't hit something that you don't want to hear. That pattern I just played for C major starts on string 6 with your first finger, okay? And it encompasses this area actually from the 8th fret up to the 15th, giving you that much space. There's another pattern which is sort of like a mirror image of this pattern that I just played, which is kind of interesting because here I'm going 1, 3, slide 1, 3, right? And I'm shifting on, or sliding on strings 6, 4, and 2. Shift, shift, shift. If I find my C note on string 5 instead, I can play sort of an inverted pattern. Instead of 1, 3, slide 1, 3, here I can go 1, 3, 1, 3, slide. And the first 2 notes in this case act as actually like pickup notes, or like leading notes. It leads me into my root note here. So here I go. Okay, so here I'm making my shifts or my slides on strings 5, 3, and 1. 1, 3, 1, 3, slide. 1, 3, 1, 3, slide. Up a fret for string 2. 1, 3, 1, 3, slide. Or the alternative fingering, as I mentioned before. 1, 3, 1, 3, slide. 1, 3, 1, 2, slide. 1, 3, and that way I'll ensure that I'm not going to hit a bad note that I don't want to hear. Again, very, very nice, fluid sounding scale. And right here is my A note, so if I want the minor version of that, if you will, I could just focus on this note. Major, minor, right? C major, A minor, same notes, just which is the note you focus on as your root or key center will determine the color or the texture of the scale, whether it's major or minor. So again, the 2 patterns, if you're starting from 6th string with your root note for your first finger, it's 1, 3, slide 1, 3, 1, 3, slide 1, 3, 1, 3, slide 1, 3. If you're seeing your root note on string 5, it's 1 3 1 3 slide, 1 3 1 3 slide, 1 3 1 3 slide. And you could also make, as I said, that when you get to the second string or the end of the third string, substitute your second finger to get yourself 1 fret higher for string 2 in both cases. And that way you won't have any chance of, hitting something you don't want to hear. So again, 2 patterns for shifting, I call them shifting horizontal pentatonic scales. And now looking at these shifting patterns, there's 2 interesting things you can see. One, the pattern sounds good as it is by itself, just using it to shift around has, as I said, a very fluid sound crossing around, going, across the fingerboard. But also you can use them as bridges or connection points between 2 vertical patterns. In other words, here's, let's say, a C major chord, okay? Right, so I didn't complete it and go all the way across, but here I'm in position 3. I made my first shift. Now I could continue on, shift, or I could stay in this position here and now play vertically. Right? So I can, again, start shifting, but instead of just playing the entire range of the scale, just shift a little bit till I get to one of the 5 positions I showed you earlier for the vertical positions. And then I can just play vertically, so I can dance around on the fingerboard. A little horizontal, a little vertical, horizontal, connect verticals, or I could just play horizontals across the board because, the horizontal patterns, even though the notes are identical, the horizontal patterns obviously have a different characteristic sound to them, a little bit more fluid sounding. Okay? 2 patterns for major and minor pentatonic scales played horizontally. Get these things in your hands and you're going to find that they're going to be a lot of fun to use and very, very user-friendly. And you're going to hear things that you might say, wow, hey, wow, that's where that comes from. Think of this. Ramblin' Man, the intro, or Blue Skies, the Allman Brothers. Right? That shifting. Right? That's how that sits so nicely in your left hand. Just playing pentatonic scales, in a horizontal fashion with the glissandos, the sliding notes, sounds very, very fluid, very, very pretty sounding. Okay? Or with the minor pentatonic. So I'm just dancing around, playing some minor pentatonic scales vertically and a little bit horizontally. And like I said, you can see it does a few things. It connects some vertical patterns. It also opens up the width of the area that you're playing, because again, if you're playing just in a vertical pattern, you're just kind of hanging between 4 and maybe 5 fret span. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but the horizontal opens up, the fingerboard, and then you can see, you really can cover the entire fingerboard when you apply these patterns. So again, get these patterns in your hands and just mess around with them and try things out, and you're going to see it's going to open up a new world to you if you haven't seen these before. Okay, now I'll take these horizontal pentatonic patterns, and by adding that extra note, the blues note if you want to call it, I'll turn these into shifting blues scales. Okay, so I'll be playing the same idea, but I'll just be adding that extra note, and there'll be 6-tone scales, there'll be major blues scales and minor blues scales, but played in a horizontal fashion. Okay, as I showed you the patterns for playing pentatonic scales, both major and minor, horizontally, I can also turn these into blues scales. And remember, to turn a pentatonic scale into a blues scale, I just have to add that extra note, that note that acts as a passing tone, turning it into a 6-tone scale. So here again is a C major pentatonic scale, a 5-tone scale. C, D, E, G, A, and octave C. To turn this into a blues scale, I add a passing tone between the second and third degree, which is E flat. So I now have a 6-tone scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I apply that same principle to the shifting pentatonic scales I showed you, the shifting pentatonic scale in the first octave was 1, 3, slide, 1, 3. So instead of playing 1, 3, slide, 1, 3, I'm going to go 1, shift up right away, 2 frets. 1, shift up, 2, 3. And that way I can easily get a nice fingering pattern, because for that little chromatic, 3-note chromatic line there. And then 1, 3 on string 5. So the C major blues scale, the 6-tone major blues scale is C, D, E flat, E, G, A. 1, shift up right away, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3. And once I have that pattern in my hand, drop down to string 4, do the same thing. 1, shift up, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3. When I get to string 2, drop down and, for string 2, and go 1 fret higher for string 2 to compensate for, the strings being tuned in thirds. 1, 1, 2, 3. So the 3 octaves of the C major blues scale are, and if I want to make that variation with my second finger, instead, as I showed you earlier, it would be 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, not 3, 2. To pull my hand into a better position, and then continue on. 1. So here's that pattern. Okay, C major blues scale, the 6-tone pattern on string 6 and 5, 4 and 3, then 2 and 1. And again, I'm making the shifts or the moves on string 6, 4 and 2. Shift, 4, shift, 2, shift. Okay, C major pentatonic scale, shifting. C major blues. Right? It has that extra tone in there, or that extra note, that leading tone. Same pattern as I showed you before, the second pattern where the root note is on string 5. I can apply that same principle. I have to add the flat third in there, okay? But again, like I showed you earlier, sort of like a mirror image. Here I'm going 1, shifting up, 1, playing those 3 extra notes and then dropping down. Here I'm going to do my pickup, then shift up. Right? 1, 3, 1, shift up, 1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1. So that's C major blues scale, starting on the where the 5th string is my root note, but again starting on string 6, using these 2 notes as a lead-in. Right? So again, you can see the sort of inversion or the mirror image, if I want to use that expression, of seeing these 2 patterns. Here again, shifting on string 6, 4, and 2. Here I'm shifting on strings 5, 3, and 1. Right? And that would apply again also if I want to use from A minor blues. Right? Making use of horizontal patterns for playing the pentatonic major minor and the pentatonic blues. And again, as with the pentatonic scales, the blues scales, as you can see, you can play them horizontally. They have a sound kind of all of their own, or you can use them as bridges to connect vertical patterns for these blues scales. So very, very cool stuff. Like I said, get these scales, patterns, get them in your hands, and then mess around with them, and you'll see how you can start to play very, very fluid sounding lines. And when I stumbled across these things, it really, really changed a lot for me, and just opened up my eyes to see a whole lot of things that I never saw before. And like I said, you're going to hear things, you're going to play them, and you can hear it say, hey, wow, that sounds like that. Hey, that's how that song goes, or that's that little riff on that song. So they're very, very, very useful. Again, the vertical patterns, no problem at all with them. The horizontal patterns, great. Mix the two together, and you have like a really, really nice array of options to go to create some really, really nice sounding lines. One other point I'd like to discuss is mixing the pentatonic scales and the blues scales with modes. In other words, when you're using the scales, pentatonic and blues, for soloing, all fine, all is good, but you can also mix them up with the modes based on the major diatonic scale to just get more out of your playing, to have more tools in your musical toolbox. If you're not familiar with the modes or how to use them, check out my videos on the modes based on the major diatonic scale. The 7 modes are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And the modes fall into 3 categories because of the chemistry of the particular mode or scale. There are major type modes, minor type modes, and a dominant type mode from the diatonic scale. There are 3 types of chords, or 3 families of chords: major type chords, minor type chords, and dominant type chords. The major chords, of course, major, major 7th, major 9th, blah, blah, blah. The minor type chords, minor, minor 7th, minor 9th. And the dominant type chords are your bluesy sounding chords, like 7th chords, 9th chords, 13th chords, things like that. And each of the modes will fall into one of those categories, or will work with one of those chord types. And that's determined because of the makeup of the mode. There are 2 major sounding modes from the diatonic scale: the Ionian mode, which is the major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and the Lydian mode. Both of those modes have a major 3rd and a major 7th, so that would put them into the major chord category, and you can mix them with major pentatonic and major blues scales. There are 4 minor sounding modes: Dorian, Phrygian, Aeolian, and Locrian. They have a flat 3rd and a flat 7th, hence putting them into the minor category, and those 4 modes can be mixed up with minor pentatonic and minor blues scales. And the last mode is the Mixolydian mode, which is the dominant sounding mode. It has a natural 3rd but a flat 7th, and because of that, it will work with dominant sounding chords, as I said, the bluesy sounding chords, 7ths, 9ths, 13ths. So again, when you want to mix up these blues and pentatonic scales with modes, you can really open up a lot more opportunities for soloing, ideas for improvisation, composing, what have you, all different applications. And the key thing to remember is which pentatonic or blues scale to mix the mode with. Again, being that there are only major and minor pentatonic scales and major and minor blues scales, it's going to be one or the other. The interesting thing, though, about the Mixolydian mode, which is your dominant sounding mode, you can mix that mode with both major and minor pentatonic scales and major and minor blues scales. And the reason for that is because when you're playing in a blues setting, a standard 12-bar blues, if you will, you're using 7th chords, 9th chords. As I said, the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic scales both sit nicely in the blues genre, as well as the major and minor blues scales sit well in the blues genre. So when playing blues, as I said, you have this wider option. You can use the Mixolydian mode with, again, both major and minor pentatonics and major and minor blues. The only difference to pay attention to is if you're playing a minor blues tune, specifically a blues tune in a minor key, let's say such as The Thrill Is Gone by B.B. King. That song is in B minor. So in that case, you can't mix the Mixolydian mode with the minor blues and the minor pentatonic, because you will have a clash, being that the Mixolydian mode has a natural 3rd. But for all other blues type tunes, your standard blues, 12-bar blues, you can use the Mixolydian mode, and as I said, major, minor pentatonic, major, minor blues. If you're not aware of the modes, or again, as I said, don't really understand how to use them, check out my videos on the modes where I go into deep explanation of the modes, how to use them, how to apply them to different musical genres, and showing you examples of mixing the modes with the pentatonic and blues scales. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and found it to be useful and informative, and found some things in there to take your playing to another level. Please leave any questions or comments in the comments section below. I'm Dan Beagleman, and those are the pentatonic and blues scales. Have a nice day.